All right, when was the moment that you first discovered class consciousness? Stay with me now, I promise.
We'll get to the Pokemon.
Every kid has that moment in their life where they encounter somebody else that's living in a completely different financial universe than they are. Whether it was that one friend who had the craziest backyard swimming pool birthday parties with the best goodie bags, or having that other friend that you would toss a couple bones to every time that you wanted to do something that would require money, like going to the mall or to the movie theater or anything of that sort. The wildest thing about kids is that for some godforsaken reason, they can sniff the pour on you from like a mile away. I swear, kids are just like this.
Are you wearing N1 socks from Walmart right now?
Those little demons have such a keen sense to detect any sort of form of economic instability. The key indicators of wealth and status growing up, and maybe you still feel this way, if you're an insecure dork loser, were articles of clothing, shoes, or accessories that made you look and act on the cusp of culture. See, I'm a 2000s kid, so growing up, those types of things, you got silly bands or Reebok Zigs that eventually turned into Nike Roches. Always flexing the newest iPod or iPad that you would get around Christmas time at school. There was no greater struggle than coming back to school after Christmas break and seeing all the different kids walk around with all of their new Christmas gifts while you were hiding your new Christmas gift in secret. A crisp pair of Hanes underwear, absolutely loaded with some stale stinkers from the walking tacos at lunch. There's one key moment to me that stands out from my childhood when I realized that some people just live in a completely different world than I do. I grew up in a middle-class household, right? Blue-collar dad who worked on machinery all day, and stay-at-home mom who eventually turned teacher. A moderate suburban home, the American dream. But this friend who lived a completely different life than I did, we'll call him Strongest McDinglius to protect his identity, invited me over to his house for one of my first sleepovers. My mom and I arrived at Strongest McDinglius's house, and he lived in the gated community neighborhood that was within my town. We pulled up to the biggest house in that gated community, and we took a long, admiring stroll up into his front door. Being 8 years old at the time, when I met Strongest McDinglius at the door, him and I just ran around his house like we were in a Scooby-Doo chase scene. My mom, she happened to stay at the door, and she complimented Strongest McDinglius's mom on the quality of their in-ground pool that was in their backyard. Strongest McDinglius's mom decided to drop an absolute bomb on my mom by telling her the cost of that pool, which just happened to be exactly how much
Our entire house cost.
This is all just to help paint the picture of the castle that I got invited into. The moment that made me develop class consciousness, it had nothing to do with Strongest's house or that in-ground pool in his backyard, but it was one specific item that he had in his basement. You know those giant soda guns that bartenders use after you order a rum and Coke and it's 99% Coke and 1% rum? It's red and it's got buttons on it and it just shoots whatever kind of soda you can think of out of it. They had one of those in their basement. This blew my tiny little mind to opposite ends of the known universe. You can just have soda whenever you want? What am I? Poor? You know how much money you just got to be sitting on to just casually have one of those in a basement bar that's functional? Anyway, you're probably asking to yourself at this point, Corn, what does any of this have to do with Pokemon Emerald? Well, on this magical night of drinking Coke straight out of the fountain like we were a dog with a water hose, we shared a moment that will live on in my memory forever. No matter the size of Strongest McDinglius' house, or that in-ground pool that lived in his backyard, we were spending time together because in one regard, we were equals. We were both training, capturing, fighting, and exploring through that beautifully designed, shiny green Game Boy Advance cartridge known as Pokemon Emerald. I told you, we would get there. One of my strongest memories from my childhood is laying on that basement floor with him. Mind you, we were laying on the basement floor of the movie theater room, okay? Using surf to get across those oceans and those different routes that were introduced in the generation. And using the link cable to be able to trade over Pokemon to each other so we could each help each other complete each other's Pokedex. I talk a lot more about the lore of my introduction to Pokemon more in my Pokemon Fire Red video, so if you haven't seen that one, Go check it out. But Pokemon Emerald, it was my first Pokemon game. It was the first Pokemon game that I ever owned. It was gifted to me. It was the first Pokemon game that I got to grind through and explore through whenever I wanted, not having to give it back to anybody else, a family member or a friend. It was my true and completely undiscovered gateway into this whole multimedia franchise. For that reason, and that reason alone, I think it's time that we take a deep look into Pokemon Emerald is a role-playing game that was developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo in 2005. Gaining huge amounts of popularity after Pokemon's initial release in 1998, they knew that they had a money factory on their hand, and they wanted to keep pumping these babies out like they were in a competition with Nick Cannon. Emerald sits alongside Ruby and Sapphire to help introduce the third generation of Pokemon to players. Nintendo and Game Freak, they have a tendency to release a Pokemon game with every new generation of handheld that they release. Red and Blue being on the Game Boy, Gold and Silver being on the Game Boy Color, and now Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald all being on the Game Boy Advance. Ushering in a new generation of Pokemon alongside a new generation of handheld gaming. In the timeline of Pokemon releases, Pokemon games notoriously have two different titles at the time of release. A slick marketing tactic to run the pocket of any mom whose kid is afraid of getting FOMO or getting swirlied at school for not having both. But starting with Gold and Silver, they started to introduce a third game along with that generation to allow even more Pokemon, some new legendaries, and even beef and potato, and sometimes even new missions. So when Generation 3 came around, people were wondering if Game Freak was going to continue this tradition of adding in a third game to go in tandem with Ruby and Sapphire. Selling over 7 million copies, they obliged, and they gave us one of the best Pokemon games of all time. Pokemon Emerald, it starts you off like any other Pokemon game. Start in a room with a dude giving you the most basic overview of Pokemon ever imaginable. But if you've played Pokemon before, you're going to notice that something is a little bit different here. Pokemon professors in the past two generations, they looked like absolute dorks. The type of guys that would look like that they would remind the teacher that they forgot to collect last night's homework. But this professor, Professor Birch, is the absolute peak representation of early 2000s chill guy. He's got the long hair with a middle part, the chin strap beard, shorts, and open-toed sandals. Professor Birch, he looks like the kind of guy that would hook you up with a sweet deal on some used gear at your local guitar center. He looks like that dope neighborhood dad that would turn a blind eye whenever you snuck beers out of his garage fridge. He looks like that chill English professor that sends out an email 5 days before class even happens and says, "Class is canceled.
I just don't even really feel like it."
Anyway, he goes on the normal spiel about Pokemon, you know, how they're friends but also war slaves, and then he asks about you. Game Freak said that there are only two genders, and you gotta pick one. I'll cut them some slack, okay? This was 2005 before the theys started coming around and all the other neo-pronouners. But, you know, since I consider myself a he-him, I went and I choose a boy every single time. After typing in your name, something different happens here than in other Pokemon games. You don't get to choose your rival's name. Hey, remember when I said this? Oh, wait, so I'm allowed to name him myself? Oh, Nintendo. Yeah.
You're gonna regret this one.
Yeah, well, I guess they did. Because you can't choose your rival's name anymore. When picking your character's gender, though, you are introduced to the dopest sprite character design. Got the crazy beast green headband, hair whiter than a Vampire Weekend concert on a literal child, rocking that crazy Balenciaga shirt, got some joggers on, and some non-creased, freshly eBay copped sneaks. You're shrunk down into a small pixel version of yourself, and then you wake up in an unfamiliar place, in the back of a moving truck. After hopping out of the truck, you're greeted by your mom, who kind of keeps you up to date on your own story. You just moved to Littleroot Town, the home base of this generation. She makes this one weird comment by saying, "Oh, the movers, they hide their Pokemon and the Pokemon do all the moving for us." Okay, fighting each other in cold blood is fine with me, but free labor is out of line! You go up to your room, and like every other Pokemon game, the most relevant Nintendo console is in your bedroom at the time. And guess what was out around this time? The Nintendo GameCube. You set the clock, you go downstairs and you watch the TV, and you watch in real time as you find out that your dad is the leader of Petalburg Gym. Your mom tells you that one of your pops' friends, he lives in town. He just so happens to be Professor Dopenswag, who we met earlier. You should go talk to him. You go next door and Birch's wife introduces you to your rival of the game. If you're playing as Guy, her name is May. After talking with May, you make a heavy dash to the wild grass looking for Professor Birch. There's a little girl standing at the base of the wild grass and she's whining about not having a Pokemon or something like that. And she asks you to go out there and see what's cracking. The moment that you walk out into the wild grass, you see Professor Birch out there getting gang initiated by some wild Pokemon. He asks for your help, and then he instructs you to choose a Pokemon from his satchel. In every Pokemon game, this is the moment when you're offered a choice. Your first Pokemon of the entire game. This moment will define your gameplay throughout the rest of your run. Birch's Man Purse houses 3 new Pokemon that are introduced into this universe. Torchic, a baby chicken that can spit fire.
An awfully hot coffee pot.
Not like that. Mudkip, you got like a tadpole dog hybrid. Or you can choose Trico, who's the Geico Gecko off of Percocet. One of the largest debates in the Pokemon fandom always comes down around this situation. Who do you pick as your starter? For me, gotta go with Torchic. Torchic, absolutely a beast. And in most Pokemon games, a good fire type sometimes can be hard to find to add into your balanced roster. And when it comes to water type, yeah, I mean, it depends. Like if it's Squirtle, then definitely. But in this game, like, I mean, if I want a good water type, I'm gonna do what I do in every other Pokemon game, which is get one of the top 3 dopest Pokemon of all time, a Gyarados. And grass types, normally a dime a dozen. So once you get your starter, that's when you assist Professor Birch and then he brings you back to his lab. He tells you to link up with his daughter and she can show you the ropes of being a Pokemon trainer. After defeating her in this first easy battle of the game, you return to the lab and you talk to Professor Birch one more time. In true Pokemon fashion, you are given the Pokedex and then you're taught to go explore and collect Pokemon with this new device to help you with the information. Then you're off to the races. All right, at this point, let's keep it a buck, okay? We all know how Pokemon games play out. You battle and defeat gym leaders. You get into some altercation with some criminal syndicate. You work your way through the Elite Four, and then you become the Pokemon champion. Almost all Pokemon games revolve around this similar plot structure. Start as a loser and become a winner through vigorous labor and competition. So what did Nintendo do this time around to add some spice into its cookie-cutter storyline progressions? For starters, they give you some skin in the game right off the bat. In every other Pokemon game, your dad decided to go grab a pack of smokes and never come back to avoid paying child support. In Pokemon Emerald, your dad is alive and he's in the flesh. Not only is he not a deadbeat in these games, he's also a gym leader. The stakes that are placed on your character are much higher than any of the games that came before. You're not just some random kid who decided to take up Pokemon training and collecting as a hobby. You're in the dynasty now. Because at this age, what else do kids have to do? Ride bikes? Kick rocks? Have unfiltered internet access at the ripe age of 12 so they can watch ISIS beheading videos on LiveLeak on the bus on the way to school so all their dopamine receptors get fried and their sensitivity to real-world events just get absolutely shattered? In this game, there is more of a societal need to become great. You have to live up to your father's shadow and become a Pokemon trainer or gym leader, just like him. Direct nepotism are also prevalent in other aspects of this game as well. Just like the older ones, your rival. Instead of your rival being the grandchild, like in the first games of the Professor, in this one, it is the direct descendant, the child of Professor Birch. But as you progress throughout the story, you realize that that rival that they introduced to you doesn't really end up becoming your rival, because they're not really there to be the league champion like you are. They're more focused on completing their Pokedex, like their dad. But the true rival of this game emerges at the end of Victory Road. A kid named Wally. who came from nothing, that you probably thought would just be that catching Pokemon tutorial. I mean, you obviously annihilate him with every fiber in your being, but still just such a unique take to show that while you're living up to your parents' legacy, your rival, by completing the Pokedex, is kind of doing the same thing. Your true rival, Wally, he reflects that character that you play as in the original 2 games. A kid with no father figure or hobbies, you know, like riding bikes or kicking rocks or watching ISIS beheading videos on the bus on the way to school on Lively. The thing to note here too is that because your rival is so focused on completing that Pokedex that they have more of like a friendly energy to them. This is a nice change of pace from the original rivals from the first 2 games, who were hyper competitive and extremely narcissistic and just kind of rude. When you engage with your rival in Emerald, it's something along the lines of like, "Oh, Corn, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. Oh,
I just spent the past 3 hours trying to pull a Caterpie out of my urethra in the Petalburg woods. You want to have a battle? If not, that's okay. I just figured I'd ask."
Rivals in the original games would pull up to you and go,
What's up, you big fat sloppy pile of garbage?
"Oh, you just got your 3rd gym badge?
I just got mine 4 days ago. Are you mentally disabled? Give me your lunch money or I'm gonna kill you with a hammer."
Another change that kind of happens here within the plot is the way that you interact with the different criminal syndicates. Team Rocket's whole deal was just kidnapping Pokemon, selling them for profit, and trying to take over the world. But Generation 3, they were the first generation that had 2 different groups of criminal syndicates that you had to fight against. Team Magma for Ruby and Team Aqua for Sapphire. The difference between the organizations is that Team Rocket was just doing evil for evil's sake. Team Magma and Team Aqua, they actually had some pretty decent arguments on why they were doing what they were doing. Magma, they said, "Oh, we have to completely expand the land on the Earth so human civilization can have more places to do things." Okay, that's actually kind of fair, I guess. And then Aqua was like, "We gotta flood the Earth to make sure that all the oceans, that we can go back to where we came from." Okay. Dope. Yeah, okay. That's kind of fair too, I guess. It's like a weird moral dilemma here because both syndicates, they have pretty decent arguments. But in true villain fashion, both of their plans just fall apart. But what makes Emerald unique compared to Ruby and Sapphire is it's not just one of the criminal syndicates. They bring both of them over from each game. They bring in Team Magma and Team Aqua to fight up against each other in this one game. And it made them interact with each other for a whole new storyline. And after all their tomfoolery and butt picking, Groudon and Kyogre rise, and they are quelled by the almighty Rayquaza. These new additions and these new plot points, they added a lot of flavor and a lot of different variation compared to other Pokemon games that had came before and introduced a whole new experience. The Game Boy Advance ushered in a whole new era that allowed a lot more processing power to be on the go, allowing for better graphics and better sprite designs. One large upgrade that compared to Generation 1 and 2 was this whole new use of different color schemes. When you look back on the earlier generations, Pokemon Generation 1, it was really just a variation of lighter or darker shades of green to make pixels pop. In Generation 2, the colors seemed to be a lot more exacerbated, with bright greens and blues and reds, creating kind of like an overall more neon-esque atmosphere to this world. Generation 3, it was really the first generation that nailed in that look of more naturalistic colors. Roaming around the worlds of Generation 3 was the most realistic experience of Pokemon that we had up to date. The thing that really made the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance shift the paradigm for Pokemon, yeah, it was the introduction of the Game Boy Advance SP. In the Dark Ages, literally, all Game Boys that got released never had a backlight to their screen. And here's the thing is, even if you purchased a copy of the Game Boy Advance generation games, like Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, you were still limited by the hardware of the Game Boy Advance on how much you could actually see of it. But when the Game Boy Advance SP came onto the scene, it was definitely a biblical experience. Let there be light. Being a kid here that only had secondhand copies of Pokemon Yellow or Crystal growing up, we were used to playing Pokemon games on a device that had the same screen as a Texas Instruments TI-84 calculator. But as the Game Boy SP hit the hands of kids and adults alike, that power switch on the side flipped on to reveal a whole new pocketable experience. It was Pokemon, but you could actually see it. While this was still available with the Game Boy Color innovation, it still just didn't hit the same as cracking open that Game Boy Advance SP under your bed sheets so the light wouldn't spill out under your bedroom door and you got flashbanged by that Motorola Razr-shaped Game Boy. Having this first real dose of pocketable blue light, it latched onto my brain to kind of lead me up to these short form videos that are algorithmically placed to completely have my attention divided. Another key factor that changes up a Pokemon game is the towns. First generation of games had the Kanto region, and then the second generation of games introduced the Johto region, and the third generation introduced the Hoenn region. If we want to be real here, there really wasn't much of a jump in between Kanto and Johto. They both had similar landscapes and vibes overall, but Johto just felt like an extension of Kanto because, it was. But Hoenn, it ushered in and introduced a whole new world for players to go out and explore. There are the obvious little towns like Littleroot, where your player starts off. They also have the obvious metropolitan areas like Rustboro City, that houses a trainer school, and also the large headquarters of a big company called Devon Corp. But things start to change up a little bit when we start visiting these towns that are actually baked into the landscape that surround them. Starting off, we have Lava Ridge Town. It's not just some old graveyard of a field that used to exist loaded with buildings now. It is baked into the side of a volcano, with a hot spring allowing citizens to be able to use it to relax. And even outside of Lava Ridge, there are routes where players will get covered by the volcanic ash. Fort Tree City is another great example of how they bake into their surroundings. Utilizing the trees and the landscapes around them, houses are actually built into the trees and have connecting bridges that allow people to traverse throughout their town, but while also staying in the trees. Pacific the Dog Town is another great example of this, of how people built a town into the environment around them. They built flotation rafts to be able to live on the ocean, house their homes, and the Pokemon Center. Suitopolis City literally decided to build their entire town within inside of a volcanic crater, living off the land and creating life within this natural landscape. This changes in the town design really made Hoenn stand out from the different regions compared to the ones that had led up before. With this constant argumentative nature in between Team Magma and Team Aqua about how there needs to be more land for people to survive, or there needs to be more oceans for people to survive. These towns are living proof that people can make a habitat in either or, no matter the circumstances that anything on the earth provides to them. We can't talk about the Hoenn region without talking about the elephant in the room. The large amount of water routes and surfing. Gen 3 haters will yap all day about the redundancy of the water routes and the surfing, but they're just not getting the big picture here. The entire point of Generation 3 is to show the difference between water and land and their balance within the ecosystem. This is one of the major symbolisms in the game. Having a lot of water here and a lot of water routes, it's pretty appropriate for the message that this game is trying to send. So the combination of neutral colors, towns, the processing power, and the backlight of the Game Boy Advance SP, it all combined together to make this game extremely dope. Pokemon Emerald's gameplay focuses around 4 main objectives. Capture Pokemon, train and battle Pokemon, beat gym leaders across the region, and defeat the Elite Four. Using a fair understanding of type differences, item usage, traversal mechanics. These objectives are undeniably kind of quite easy and end up making this game and all the other Pokemon games in the series crazy addicting and fun. Again, let's keep it a buck and some change real quick, okay? Gameplay in this Pokemon game is almost identical to the games that came before and the games that are gonna come after. Like with the story, I mean, they don't really reinvent the wheel. But you know what?
That's fair.
It would be kind of stinky booty cheeks if they decided to switch up gameplay mechanics out of nowhere every single time that there was a new release. Picture this. You go to a football game, and right before the game starts, the referee gets on the Jumbotron. The referee says,
"All right, guys, I just got a letter straight from the desk of Roger Goodell. New rules of football are this. The end zones are actually places where you lose points and you gain points by staying on the field. Every time there's a foul, instead of pausing while we review the play, all the players in tandem have to sing Defying Gravity from Wicked. One final change is instead of tackling, all players have to kiss each other. Tom Brady and his son style."
Millions of football fans around the world would be like,
"Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?"
I know that when I go to a football game, the objective is always clear. Pass the ball, get a first down, make it to the end zone, and score some points. The reason why people continuously watch football and other sporting events is because there's a sense of familiarity and understanding of what they're watching, but with new variables that change the odds and outcomes of success every single time. So outside of CTE and natural aging progression, what does the NFL do to switch this up? Have a constant rotation of new players enter into the league, changing out those odds of success and outcomes every time. The same goes for Pokemon. Pokemon, the objectives are clear every time. Collect Pokemon, train Pokemon, battle Pokemon, become the champion of the new region. But in every generation, there are some new additions that don't really take away the core principles of the game, but trick everyone into thinking that this is a whole new experience in entirety. So for Generation 3, what are these gameplay mechanics that make Generation 3 and Pokemon Emerald so incredibly dope? Well, for starters, it's obviously the staple of every new generation: introducing new players into the league. The introduction of over 135 new Pokemon makes this game feel so fresh and new and exciting. This allows players to feel more immersed in the world, because you're finding and collecting Pokemon that are only exclusive to this landmass of Hoenn. Brainwashing an entire fan base with the slogan, "Gotta catch 'em all." That slogan, it transcends generations of games and regions. People will run to the stores and grab both copies of games because they've been psychologically conditioned by the Pokemon Company to catch 'em all. But outside of the psychological dependency to have a hoarder's worth amount of Pokemon in the PC, there really used to be a true feeling of excitement when a new Pokemon game came out and you could see all of the new Pokemon that were getting introduced into this generation. Back when Game Freak actually used to have a sense of creativity, and they weren't making Pokemon that turned into motorcycles, or whatever this steaming pile of flaming diarrhea is. Outside of the new roster of Pokemon, there were also slight variations that were added to the second main objective of the game, which is battling. Double battles were introduced in this generation, allowing you to battle 2 trainers at once, raising the total count of Pokemon in the battle to 4. This addition added a new element of strategy into the game, which is the entire backbone and premise of Pokemon. While double battles, they didn't occur extremely frequently, it was extremely cathartic to bump into that news reporter crew and absolutely smoke them with your overpowered starter and your HM slave smashing Rock Smasher's strength. Another gameplay element that was added into Generation 3 is the use of berries. Game Freak definitely thought that they cooked by adding in this mechanic into the game, but it didn't really change anything for me in the long run. If anything, berries are just over-glorified items that could have just been found along the routes anyway. Only time that I used a berry was when I was cooking through the Elite Four. A Lepa berry allowed you to restore PP points by 10. This was powerful after spamming my most powerful attacks. One factor that needs to be talked about when talking about Pokemon Emerald is its take on pacing. Game design element that could be considered more crucial than jiggle physics to you absolute sweaty basement dwellers. Pokemon games, they normally have the same pacing. All of your Pokemon normally are within the same 3 to 5 level stretch of all the different trainers and wild type that you find around you. And also that comes to gyms or the Elite Four. There's normally that range of difficulty between your Pokemon's level and the other wild Pokemon or trainers or gym leaders' Pokemon. The pacing here is pretty similar to that throughout Emerald. There is absolutely one major factor that can change the pacing in the course of this gameplay. Rayquaza. Once destroying Kyogre and Groudon, you have the ability to capture Rayquaza. I'm going to say something here that's probably sacrilegious to the utmost of Pokemon dorks, but I don't care. I use the Master Ball on the game's biggest legendary every single time. Especially in this game, when we're talking about pacing, you can capture a level 70 Pokemon before the Elite Four. Look, if you're a glutton for punishment and you want to go out to the Sky Pillar with 1,000 Pokeballs and 1,000,000 revives after beating the Elite Four, be my guest. But not me, buddy boy. I want the power. I grab Rayquaza as soon as I can, and then absolutely drone strike any single Pokemon trainer or gym leader that gets in my way, and then sweep the Elite Four with one revive. Quaza's Outrage is the most OP move in all of Pokemon, except Swords Dance. You want to talk about how some Pokemon games feel like they're repeating the same thing over and over and over again. This is a nice way to freshen up the Pokemon experience and become a literal god up against the top 5 best trainers in the region. After all the running around I did for Devincorp and taking down both Team Magma and Aqua and getting almost all the gym badges, all in 4th grade, it made capturing and using Rayquaza all that more rewarding throughout the rest of the gameplay experience. I deserved him. I'm gonna use him. I win. While the gameplay here is arguably very similar to a lot of other Pokemon games, these few differences here, they really made Pokemon Emerald very exciting to play. The combination of this fresh take on a Pokemon journey, the new roster of Pokemon that got introduced, the updated art style and color palettes, and the new gameplay mechanics, it all makes this game so incredibly dope. All right, you gotta play Pokemon Emerald. It truly is the last dose of just raw dogged Pokemon that you can get before you get the DS dual screens or the Mega Evolutions or the pseudo 3D graphics or any of that other baloney. There's 2 ways that you can play Pokemon Emerald. First one is go crack out that old school Game Boy Advance. Now is the time to hit up your parents and see if they still have that Game Boy sitting next to your failed report cards and that pack of cigarettes they stole from you sitting in the nightstand next to your bed. And if they don't, you know what? A great place that you can find these for a good price is just shop around at some garage sales in your neighborhood and go see if you can get one for a decent price. And for us folks that love to go ham bologna sandwich on these old games, pop over to eBay for an authentic cartridge. Oh yeah, next time you see an obvious reseller at one of those garage sales, put their teeth through the back of their neck, because this is their fault. If you don't want to catch assault charges or even talk to your parents, there's another way you can play this game. You know what to do.
Look, it wouldn't come down to assault or sailing the 7 seas if Nintendo would just put these titles onto Switch Online.
What's the starter that you choose in Generation 3? What was that one item that kid had at school that made them seem rich? You think unfiltered internet access to 12-year-olds made my generation a little less empathetic? Let me know in the comments. And as always, this channel was made to promote my band. Go listen to our debut album. All right, this is it. Cornborn, signing out.